So think about this for a second. What if, what if the gold stars you got in kindergarten or the straight A's in high school and just that relentless cultural push to always, believe in yourself?
Right, that constant pressure.
Yeah, exactly. What if that exact pressure is the reason you feel so perpetually exhausted and burned out today?
It's a huge question.
It is.
Yeah.
Because we operate in this society that treats self-esteem like it's the ultimate psychological currency. Like, if you aren't just radiating confidence all the time, you are somehow failing at being a modern adult.
Oh, absolutely. It's treated as a moral failing if you aren't confident.
Right. But the source material we're doing a deep dive into today, it presents a framework that completely turns that whole premise upside down. And honestly, the thesis is radically counterintuitive, but also deeply liberating.
It really is.
The core idea is just this. It is perfectly fine to have low self-esteem.
Yeah, which sounds almost blasphemous to say out loud today. But the modern obsession with high self-esteem is, well, it's essentially a massive misdiagnosis of what humans actually need to function.
A misdiagnosis. I love that phrasing.
Because it is. The texts we're examining today dismantle this obsession by making a really surgical distinction between true self-worth and what is, in psychological reality, just superiority.
The superior.
Yes. When you force yourself to artificially inflate your self-esteem, you're not actually helping yourself. You're forcing your brain into a state of chronic, high-alert comparison.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. So today's deep dive is going to explore the neurobiology and the psychology behind why that makes us so miserable. And, we'll introduce a completely different psychological paradigm.
But we're from Japan. Right.
Exactly. Rooted in Japanese Morita Therapy, it offers a genuine exit from that toxic cycle.
So to really understand why we are all so stressed out about our lack of confidence, I feel like we need to trace the origin of how our definition of self-esteem got so distorted in the first place.
We really do. We have to look back.
Because if we look at, say, the late 1980s and the 1990s, particularly in Western education systems, there was this massive institutional pivot.
The self-esteem movement.
Exactly. The prevailing psychological theory basically became that low self-esteem was the root cause of literally every societal ill.
Right. From poor academic performance to criminal behavior. Everything was blamed on low self-esteem.
Yeah. And the solution they came up with was to aggressively manufacture self-esteem in children through just constant, unyielding external praise.
Everyone gets a trophy.
Right. The classic participation trophy era. But that institutional pivot, it fundamentally rewired how an entire generation processes their own value.
It absolutely did, because when a child receives praise for, say, getting a good grade or just obeying classroom rules or meeting an adult's expectations.
Trip quietly in a circle.
Right, exactly. When that happens, a very specific neurochemical event occurs in the brain. The brain releases a massive surge of dopamine.
Reward chemical.
Exactly. It's a reward mechanism. So the child experiences this rush of elation and they internalize the thought, I am worthy.
But the fatal flaw here, as our source material points out, is that we have collectively conflated that dopamine hit of external validation with actual structural self-worth.
We confused a temporary chemical high with a foundational psychological structure.
Yeah, we took this fleeting chemical reward and basically decided, yep, this is the foundation of the human psyche now.
Which is incredibly dangerous because that sense of worth is based entirely on evaluation, right? It's conditional.
Conditional on what, exactly?
Conditional on being judged as good or successful or smart by a third party, a teacher, a parent, a boss. This feeling isn't actually self-esteem. As the text argues, it is superiority.
Superiority, because you're being ranked.
Exactly. It is a strictly comparative state where you are elevated above a baseline or above your peers based entirely on some external metric.
Which means it's inherently fragile.
So fragile. We can call this borrowed confidence.
Borrowed confidence. I really like that term.
Yeah, because when your confidence is leased from the evaluations of others, your brain constantly requires the eyes of others to sustain it.
You literally need people looking at you and grading you.
You need a continuous feed. You need the gold stars, the promotions, the social media likes, just to maintain your basic psychological equilibrium.
And the moment that external validation is removed,
the brain registers it not just as a disappointment, but as a literal survival threat.
Wait, a survival threat, like a physical threat?
Yes. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, being evaluated poorly historically meant being cast out of the tribe.
Oh, wow. And being cast out meant death.
Precisely. So when a project goes unnoticed at work today, or a failure occurs, the person's entire sense of existence is shaken to its core.
That evolutionary link really explains the sheer intensity of the anxiety. It clarifies why highly accomplished individuals, people with advanced degrees, lucrative careers, the whole package.
The ones who look like they have it all figured out.
Exactly. Why they so often suffer from crushing imposter syndrome.
Yeah, because from the outside, their anxiety looks totally irrational. You look at them and think, why are you anxious? You're so successful.
Right. But internally,
Yeah.
they are operating on this massive structural flaw. Their confidence was manufactured on the condition of constant superiority.
Exactly. The lack of confidence in high achievers, it isn't a lack of willpower. It's not a character deficit. The foundation itself is the vulnerability.
Because if someone's internal monologue is basically, I am only valuable because I am the smartest person in this room.
Then their self-worth is perpetually held hostage by the possibility that someone smarter might walk through the door at any second.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a miserable way to live.
Yeah.
But there's a friction point here I want to push back on a little bit.
Sure, go for it.
Because praising a child for a job well done is, well, it's a natural developmental tool,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
If a child works really hard on a math test and gets an A, celebrating that achievement reinforces the work ethic. The act of praise isn't inherently destructive, is it?
No, the praise itself isn't the problem. The danger materializes when praise becomes the exclusive pillar supporting a person's identity.
Ah, I see.
The shift from I did a good thing to I am only a good person because I do good things, that is where the pathology begins.
So it's the architectural equivalent of building this sprawling, incredibly beautiful, multi-million-dollar mansion, right?
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
But you build it on rented land.
Yes, perfect analogy.
The structure itself is magnificent. That's your resume, your accolades, your carefully curated public image. But the ground it sits on belongs to the landlord.
And the landlord represents external evaluation.
Right. So if the landlord decides to terminate the lease, or they just stop validating your right to be there, the house is worthless. You have nothing.
And living in a house on rented land dictates a life of low-grade chronic anxiety. You are perpetually terrified of the landlord's mood.
Always waiting for the eviction notice.
Exactly. Let's look at a hypothetical from the source text. Consider a young professional who has navigated their entire life via this evaluation-based superiority.
Right. They achieve straight A's, graduated top of their class.
Entirely fueled by clear, objective metrics of success. But then they enter the corporate environment and they're handed a subjective, ambiguous project.
Oh, that's the worst. No grading rubric.
None. There is no clear right answer. And crucial to this dynamic, their manager is totally hands-off and offers zero immediate praise.
So without that external metric to confirm their superiority, that borrowed confidence just evaporates.
Instantly, the subjective nature of the task completely removes the dopamine feed they've relied on since they were 5 years old.
They aren't just confused by the logistics of the project, right? Their whole nervous system is thrown into chaos.
Yes, because the mechanism they use to justify their own existence is suddenly totally inaccessible.
That is terrifying.
It is. And the reliance on clear, easily comparable metrics of superiority, it functions adequately during childhood and early adulthood because the environment provides those metrics.
Right. School systems, athletic competitions, early career milestones, they offer very public, very rigid yardsticks.
You can line everyone in a classroom up and definitively say who scored the highest on a spelling test.
But the source material heavily emphasizes that this system has a definitive biological and social expiration date, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The metrics of youth are fundamentally temporary.
So if this borrowed confidence built on superiority works well enough early on, why exactly does it eventually fail us as we age?
Because as aging occurs, those objective yardsticks disintegrate. The physical stamina and the raw cognitive processing speed of youth naturally plateau.
And eventually decline.
Right. Early career milestones fade into the rearview mirror. And more importantly, the sheer volume of competition just increases exponentially.
There will always be someone younger, faster, or seemingly more innovative entering your space.
Always.
It kind of reminds me of playing a really complex video game.
How so?
Well, the early levels are designed to be conquered using raw stats, right? You choose a fast character, you run straight through the obstacles, and you win.
Okay, I follow.
And that mirrors youth getting good grades, relying on natural aptitude, or just those early bursts of endless energy. But the late game environment becomes wildly complex.
Right, it requires nuance.
Nuance, strategic patience,
Mhm.
the ability to navigate total ambiguity.
Mhm.
If you keep trying to just use those raw early game stats to brute force your way through the late game, you're going to get crushed by the environment.
That is exactly what happens psychologically.
Hmm,
The psychological exhaustion of this transition is profound.
I can imagine.
People who have relied on the raw stats of superiority to prop up their self-worth face an immense sense of loss as they age,
Because the tools they used are gone.
rendered obsolete by the passage of time, and the loss of those genuine metrics often breeds really highly toxic compensatory coping mechanisms.
Because the brain is still desperately seeking that superiority dopamine hit, right? So it just
Yes.
begins to manufacture artificial metrics.
Precisely. This manifests as a relentless drive to look down on others, simply to establish a comparative advantage. Oh, wow. So criticizing a colleague's presentation or judging a neighbor's life choices.
Or experiencing a surge of satisfaction when someone else fails.
Right, the German concept of Schadenfreude.
Exactly. But the text points out these aren't just character flaws. They are desperate neurobiological attempts to patch the cracks in a collapsing psychological foundation.
That is wild to think about. It breeds this really specific type of hypervigilant jealousy, doesn't it?
It does. You find yourself consumed with resentment toward people who don't follow the rules you've sacrificed yourself for.
Or who achieve the things you feel entitled to.
This creates what the text calls the superiority treadmill.
The superiority treadmill.
To maintain the feeling of high self-esteem, you have to constantly scan your environment for proof that you are winning.
So you're scrolling through social media not to actually connect with friends, but to measure yourself against them.
Exactly. You analyze a coworker's promotion and you experience a physical stress response. Not out of genuine ambition for the role, but because they secured a point on the board and you didn't. And the cognitive load required to continuously run that comparative math in the background of your mind, it's just a severe, relentless drain on your mental energy.
It inevitably leads to complete burnout. But this introduces a massive societal contradiction.
Right, because the individual's exhausted, their raw stats are slipping, the superiority treadmill is burning out their nervous system, but society isn't letting up.
Not at all. The cultural megaphone is still blaring, demanding that they exhibit high self-esteem, absolute confidence, and unwavering self-belief.
So when people feel their superiority slipping, but society still demands this performance of high self-esteem, how do they cope? They fake it.
They do, more than fake it. To bridge the gap between their internal exhaustion and the external societal demands, people adopt a psychological state the source text identifies as kaju-tekyu.
Kaju-tekyu, which translates to over-adaptation.
Yes, over-adaptation. This is the process of adapting to an environment to such an extreme degree that you literally inflict psychological damage upon yourself. To survive the pressure of appearing confident, individuals systematically suppress their authentic emotional state.
So they push their true selves aside to perform the role of a highly confident person.
Hmm.
But you're saying it goes further than just fake it till you make it.
Oh, much further. The mechanism of over-adaptation is incredibly insidious. By constantly hyper-monitoring how they are perceived and ensuring they never display vulnerability, these individuals sever the connection to their own internal emotional signaling.
They disconnect from their own feelings.
Totally. The brain prioritizes social survival, maintaining that mask of the competent, confident professional over authentic emotional processing.
Because the brain thinks social survival is literal survival.
Exactly. And over time, the neural pathways dedicated to recognizing and processing genuine feelings actually atrophy. The text notes that these earnest, hardworking people literally forget how they actually feel.
That is heartbreaking. The mask just fuses to the face.
It really does. And the tragedy is that this is incredibly common among the highest achievers in corporate environments.
And those environments often deploy a really specific cultural double bind that accelerates this whole over-adaptation process, don't they?
They do. The text draws on Japanese cultural dynamics, which honestly are equally prevalent in global corporate structures, and it highlights a deeply toxic contradiction.
The contradiction of expectations.
Right. The organization explicitly demands that you have high self-esteem. You must be assertive, visionary, exude confidence.
But simultaneously, the implicit cultural rule demands extreme modesty, deference to hierarchy, and just an unwavering commitment to harmony. So you're basically instructed to drive with one foot slammed on the gas pedal.
Be a relentless rock star.
Right, and the other foot slammed on the brake. Never outshine the team, never ask for the spotlight, remain perfectly humble.
The physics of that contradiction mean the engine will inevitably destroy itself.
How can anyone win a game where the rules contradict each other like that?
You can't. If you assert your confidence, you violate the unwritten rule of modesty, and you run the risk of being labeled arrogant or difficult or a threat to the hierarchy.
But if you lean into humility, you violate the explicit mandate for confidence, and then you're labeled weak or unpromising or lacking leadership potential.
It is a maze constructed with absolutely no exit. There is no correct answer, and navigating it requires a massive expenditure of invisible, unacknowledged mental energy.
Just constantly burning out the engine. So if the game is fundamentally rigged, which it clearly is, and striving for high self-esteem through superiority is this biological trap, what is the alternative?
Well, recognizing that the game is rigged is the first necessary prerequisite for psychological freedom. The solution isn't to try harder to balance the gas and the brake.
The solution is to get out of the car.
Get completely out of the car.
Yeah.
The source material pivots away from self-esteem entirely and introduces the alternative.
Which is a completely different psychological approach.
Yes. The concept is jikojuyu, or self-acceptance.
Self-acceptance.
This distinction is the core of the psychological shift. Self-esteem, as we've culturally defined it, is an evaluative process. It requires you to love a highly capable, successful version of yourself.
It requires the metrics.
Exactly. Self-acceptance, on the other hand, is the total detachment from evaluation. It operates entirely outside the binary of superiority and inferiority.
So it's the ability to just hold an image of yourself and simply state, this is fine.
Yes, this is fine.
It is acknowledging the unembellished, life-sized version of yourself without that compulsion to artificially inflate your worth through overestimating yourself, or aggressively humble yourself through underestimating.
Just quietly acknowledging reality. Now, the societal fear surrounding self-acceptance is that it somehow equates to resignation.
Right, that's exactly what I was going to ask. Doesn't just accepting myself as I am mean I'm giving up?
Yeah.
Isn't that just settling for mediocrity?
That's the common assumption. The logic implies that if you accept your flaws, you'll never fix them.
Because you aren't motivated anymore.
But the psychological reality is the exact opposite. The expert analysis in the text explains that self-acceptance is the absolute prerequisite for any genuine growth.
How so?
Consider the mechanics of a GPS navigation system. A GPS cannot calculate a route to a new destination if it doesn't know its exact current coordinates.
That makes total sense.
If you are constantly overestimating your abilities to protect your fragile, superiority-based self-esteem, you are feeding the GPS false coordinates.
Right. You're telling the GPS you're in New York when you're actually in Chicago.
Exactly. You cannot chart a course to improvement because you are actively lying to yourself about your starting line.
So self-acceptance basically calibrates the GPS.
It calibrates the GPS. It
Yep.
is the quiet acknowledgement of reality. I'm at point A. I have these specific deficits. I have these specific strengths. I am right here.
And dropping the exhaustion of constant comparison, it actually frees up the energy you need to live authentically.
Yes, establishing that unshakable baseline frees up the massive cognitive load previously dedicated to the superiority treadmill.
The energy expended on comparing yourself to peers, maintaining that mask of over-adaptation.
And frantically seeking external validation. That energy is suddenly reclaimed, and that reclaimed energy can then be directed toward authentic, sustainable growth.
The heavy armor of I must be flawless doesn't actually protect you. It just immobilizes you.
That's a great way to put it.
So conceptually, discarding the rubric and finding this baseline makes perfect sense. But the human brain is so neuroplastically wired to seek those dopamine hits of approval.
We are deeply conditioned to crave the gold stars.
So how do we actually practice this? The transition from theory to practice has to require some specific mechanical interventions, right, to rewire that conditioning.
It does. The text provides highly actionable behavioral habits designed to disrupt those deeply ingrained neural pathways.
Okay, let's get into the practical steps.
The first intervention is the deliberate creation of what the text calls unevaluated time.
Unevaluated time. So this requires dedicating a specific block of time, the source says roughly an hour a week, to an activity where absolute zero results, metrics, or evaluations are expected, or even possible.
Crucially, this cannot be a side hustle.
Right. No monetizing your hobbies.
Exactly. It cannot be training for a marathon where you monitor your split times. It cannot involve creating art with the latent intention of posting it on social media to see how many likes it gets.
Because then you're right back on the treadmill.
Exactly. It must be an activity insulated entirely from the economy of evaluation.
So what does that actually look like?
The text suggests taking a walk with no predetermined destination, drawing strictly for your own eyes and maybe drawing poorly on purpose, or simply sitting and listening to an entire album from beginning to end without multitasking.
Just taking off a heavy lead-lined backpack you didn't even realize you were wearing.
The mechanism behind this is essentially neuroplastic starvation.
Neuroplastic starvation.
Yeah. By forcing the brain to engage in an activity where grading is fundamentally impossible, you starve the superiority complex of its required fuel. You aren't succeeding, you aren't failing, you are just being.
And over time, the repeated practice of this unevaluated time allows the nervous system to internalize a profound physical and emotional reality.
Which is that your pure existence, completely divorced from productivity or output, holds intrinsic value.
You practice the state of being to counteract the chronic disease of doing. I love that.
It's incredibly restorative. Now, the second practical intervention shifts the focus to how we observe ourselves.
The text refers to gaining an objective perspective, effectively utilizing a best friend technique.
Right. This involves establishing a literal physical distance from yourself. The source suggests standing a few steps back from a mirror and consciously shifting your internal monologue to mirror the way you would speak to a deeply cherished friend.
Which is so important because the disparity between how we treat others and how we treat ourselves is a universal psychological phenomenon.
It's massive. The default mode network in the brain, which handles our internal monologue, is so often hijacked by a ruthless, tyrannical inner critic.
If I talked to my friends the way my inner monologue talks to me, I'd have 0 friends left.
We all would. We extend infinite grace, context, and patience to a friend who makes an error. But we demand flawless execution from ourselves.
So the intervention is the purposeful, conscious redirection of that empathy inward.
Exactly. When a failure occurs, the practice is to interrupt the tyrant's automatic response. You pause and ask the objective question. What would I say to my best friend in this exact scenario?
The response changes from, you are a complete failure and everyone knows it, to something like, you are exhausted, the project was poorly defined, and you'll navigate it better next time.
You are actively practicing self-acceptance in real time. You acknowledge the flaw or the failure without structurally destroying the value of the person.
That is so powerful.
It is. And to fully anchor these practical steps, the source material introduces a broader, incredibly powerful psychological framework that explains why letting go is so much more effective than forcing change.
This is where we get into Morita Therapy.
Yes, Morita Therapy.
So Morita Therapy was developed in the 1910s by a Japanese psychiatrist named Shoma Morita, and it stands in stark contrast to a lot of Western psychological approaches.
Particularly certain branches of cognitive behavioral therapy that focus heavily on identifying and actively changing negative thought patterns.
Right, where Western modalities often encourage you to challenge and reframe a feeling of anxiety or low self-worth. Morita Therapy, which is heavily influenced by the principles of Zen Buddhism, suggests that the attempt to change the feeling is the actual source of the pathology.
Which brings us to the core concept of akuchi.
Akuchi. This translates roughly to bad wisdom or harmful cleverness.
Exactly, harmful cleverness. Akuchi is the specific, intense suffering generated by the attempt to use willpower and intellect to manipulate phenomena that are fundamentally outside of our control.
Like our baseline emotions.
Yes, our baseline emotions, our autonomic nervous system responses, and our immediate feelings.
So the intellect tells you, I feel terrified about this presentation, but I must project high self-esteem. I will force myself to feel confident.
And that is the paradox of akuchi. The thought, I must raise my self-esteem, masquerades as a positive, productive impulse. You believe you are engaging in self-improvement.
But Morita Therapy identifies this as a catastrophic trap.
A total trap. Because human emotions cannot be bent by sheer force of will, the harder the intellect attempts to mandate a feeling of confidence, the more the brain hyperfixates on the glaring absence of that confidence.
The sheer effort of trying to change the emotion traps you in a feedback loop of anxiety about your anxiety.
You're worrying about the fact that you're worrying.
It's like struggling in quicksand. The physics of Akuchi operate exactly like quicksand.
Explain that, because it's a perfect visualization.
Well, when you step into quicksand, which in this analogy represents the sudden onset of anxiety or a crash in self-worth, your instinct, your cleverness, screams at you to fight.
Right. Ow.
You violently thrash your arms and legs, utilizing massive amounts of energy to force yourself out of the mud. You literally command yourself to escape.
But the physical properties of the quicksand dictate that the application of force creates a vacuum.
Exactly. The harder you thrash, the faster and deeper you sink. The frantic effort to escape is the exact mechanism that buries you.
So how do you survive?
Surviving quicksand requires a completely counterintuitive response. You must cease all struggling. You have to lay back, increase your surface area, and submit to your current position in the mud.
Which feels terrifying.
Because it mimics resignation. But stopping the fight is the only physical way to stop sinking.
And that is the precise mechanism for overcoming Akuchi in Morita Therapy.
You just stop thrashing.
The ultimate psychological relief does not manifest when you finally achieve the mandated high self-esteem. The relief arrives the moment you stop fighting the mud.
It is the profound internal quiet that occurs when you just state, "It is entirely acceptable to be exactly as I am right now."
Yes. If the anxiety is present, let it be present. If the confidence is absent, let it be absent. There is no need to rush out and artificially construct a confident persona.
You dismantle the mandate to be amazing. You give yourself permission to just be average today.
And you can literally feel the physical sensation of tension leaving the shoulders when that mandate is lifted. You allow yourself to be unembellished.
When you abandon the attempt to manipulate your internal state through willpower, the tension dissipates. The quicksand releases its grip.
You are no longer superior, and you are no longer inferior. You simply exist, and that baseline existence is inherently sufficient.
The territory we've covered today fundamentally rewrites the cultural script on self-worth.
It really challenges everything we're taught.
We deconstructed the 1980s self-esteem movement, recognizing how it completely conflated the dopamine hits of childhood praise with structural value, leaving us with this fragile confidence built entirely on rented land.
We analyze the expiration date of those early life metrics and how the loss of objective superiority triggers a desperate, exhausting treadmill of comparison and toxic coping mechanisms as we age.
And we examined the neurobiology of overadaptation, highlighting that devastating corporate double bind that forces individuals to constantly ride the gas and the brake until they completely lose touch with their authentic emotional baseline.
We contrasted evaluative self-esteem with true self-acceptance, demonstrating how acknowledging your unembellished reality is the actual only way to calibrate your psychological GPS for real growth.
And we mapped out the path to rewiring the brain through unevaluated time, the best friend technique, and the profound wisdom of Morita Therapy, learning that thrashing against our own natural emotions in the quicksand of Akuchi is what truly drowns us.
And, the source material offers one final, really striking implication that elevates this entire framework beyond just the individual.
What's that?
Well, throughout this analysis, the focus has been on the internal benefits of letting go of the need for high self-esteem, right? Saving your own nervous system from exhaustion. But the text notes that when you finally treat yourself kindly, when you accept your unembellished self, and you no longer require a manufactured sense of superiority to justify your existence.
A profound shift occurs in your external environment, too.
Exactly. Think about it. When you are trapped on the superiority treadmill, every human interaction is fundamentally transactional and competitive.
Because every person you meet is either a threat to your status or just a metric by which you can elevate yourself.
But the moment you drop the burden of needing to be superior, you no longer require the people around you to be inferior.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly profound.
By dropping the burden of superiority, you don't just save yourself. You become capable of seeing others outside the economy of evaluation.
By treating your own unembellished self with grace, you naturally extend that exact same grace to the world.
You become a safer, deeply authentic, kinder presence for everyone else in your life, your partners, your kids, your coworkers.
The ultimate liberation of accepting your own low self-esteem isn't just that you get to stop fighting the quicksand. It's that you become a person who can genuinely connect with others, completely free from the exhaustion of having to prove you deserve to be there.
It changes everything.
It really does. So we want to encourage you to take that hour of unevaluated time this week. Step off the rented land, quiet the inner tyrant, and let the quicksand settle.
It is perfectly fine to just be exactly as you are.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.